Good morning, children. What is crack-a-lacking out there? Okay, today we are going to be looking at chapters 11, 12, and 13. You'll have until Monday to take care of all this reading in our blog, of course, and we are using it to think a little bit about purposeful repetition. You have probably noticed that Holden cannot stop repeating himself constantly. Okay, if you've noticed that, that's a good thing because you're supposed to notice that. Purposeful repetition is something that is supposed to grab your attention. So, in general, here, before we get into the really real stuff, I want to say a few things. So, I've given back feedback for our first technique analysis paragraph. I would recommend anyone who scored below a 9 to just revise it based on that feedback and get all those points. I'm going to be doing that for several of our projects coming up. Okay. Our second technique analysis paragraph is happening on Monday. So when you guys get up on Monday and you open up your ELA work, you're going to see something very similar to our previous thing. You'll have a passage. You'll have to identify a technique, talk about an idea the technique supports, and how that technique does that. Finally, our second round of discussion will take place Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. So I'm going to go ahead and post a sign-up sheet tomorrow. I'll give you some guiding questions on Monday. And then on Tuesday and Wednesday, we will talk. All right, let's get into repetition. So purpose of repetition. It is the repeating of a word or phrase. Duh. And it's a common rhetorical device that is used to add emphasis or draw attention to specific ideas in writing and speech. Okay, it stresses certain pieces of information, certain feelings, certain concepts. Okay, but it can also be an important tool in developing things like tone, the speaker's attitude, mood, the way we as readers feel, the emotions that are going through us, and of course, rhythm and cadence, which makes the overall piece much more aesthetically pleasing and easier to read. So a closer look, okay? Just at what I was talking about a moment ago. Each of those different intended effects, which, by the way, I need to see you guys talking more about intended effects. That's really important. But what is it? How does it do these things? So if it's emphasizing or highlighting information, okay, it's repeatedly drawing your eye to a fact or a feeling or a concept. Like in this example right here, you're a bad man, a very bad man, such a bad man. So in this case, that repetition, that reiteration of that point, bad man, bad man, bad man, is communicating to us, hey, this character clearly feels that this guy is no good. That's giving us insight into our story by emphasizing or highlighting information. Now, in order to create tone or mood, you've got to think about diction and connotation. Specifically, you got to think about what feelings the words are imbued with. So love me, say that you love me. Some beautiful cardigans. I don't know if you children are aware of the cardigans. They're great. But that repetition of the word love that has such a strong connotation of romance, of passion, okay, of happiness, that is imbuing this statement with that tone, okay? We can tell if this person is awestruck or head over heels. It creates a mood of kind of jolliness. We're thinking about, okay, when we see repetition, what is the connotation of the language being repeated? And then finally creating cadence or rhythm. Okay, there is a land of the living and a land of the dead, and the bridges love, the only survival, the only meaning. The repetition of those sounds, we get only, we get land, okay? The repetition of the sounds makes everything kind of flow together, okay? It sounds similar. This makes it much easier for someone to read because it's aesthetically pleasing. When we get a nice flow going, when we get a rhythm going, it's easier for us as readers to stay on top of all the ideas and to keep track of things. Okay, so some specific types of repetition that we've talked about before. We're going to talk about one new one in just a moment, but you've probably seen some of these already in Catcher in the Rye. Anaphora is the repetition at the start of sentences or clauses. okay, when the writer is repeating at the beginning of a sentence, beginning of a clause, like, I'm sick and tired of you letting me down. I'm sick and tired of you making me mad, emphasizing how exhausted this person is. There's epistrophe, which is repetition at the end of sentences or clauses. Where now? Who now? When now? And then finally, there is symplosi, which is repetition at both the start and end of clauses and sentences. Okay? The madman is not the man who has lost his reason. The madman is the man who lost everything except his reason. Beautiful, sorry. Creating that beautiful rhythm, that cadence that kind of lulls us in and allows us to see those highlighted ideas. Okay? So a new one, though, that we want to talk about because it's all over the place in Catcher in the Rye is diacope. Now, diacope is a very, very, very common, much more general type of repetition where a word or phrase is repeated with just a few words in between. And it can happen anywhere in sentences, anywhere in a paragraph. It's much more flexible, much more general. Okay? It's useful for us to understand this because it's probably going to be one of the types of repetition that we see more so than any of the others. Generally now, there aren't too many words in between the repeated words, but the rules, again, are very flexible, very, very loose. And this technique often overlaps with other techniques or forms of repetition. So we'll take a look at some examples so I can show you what I'm talking about here. Okay, our first quote from Anna Karenina. Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Now, as you can see, we have two repeated words, okay, unhappy, okay, repeated in there, but they don't happen at the beginning of the statement. They don't happen at the end of the statement. They're sprinkled throughout with some words in between. That's diacope. Now, the form of the word can also be a little bit different in diacope. So if we look at our next example, we'll see prim, primly, and primly, okay? Prim and primly being different, but still having the same root word. He wore prim-vested suits with neckties blocked primly against the collar buttons of his primly starched white suits. Again, sprinkled throughout, not at the beginning or at the end, but kind of much more flexibly placed. Now, can they be at the beginning or the end? Definitely. They can overlap with those other techniques, but they don't have to. Finally, we've got this example right here. Scott Farkas staring out at us with his yellow eyes. He had yellow eyes. So help me God, yellow eyes. So this one is a diacope, but you may be noticing that it's also an epistrophe because those words are sprinkled throughout those sentences, and our last one is just there, okay? But they're also frequently at the end of the clauses. Diacope, it's going to be very, very, very common. Be on the lookout for it when you see Holden talking about whatever the hell it is Holden's talking about. Finally, you really should keep this in mind. If you see repetition, you should pause for a second and ask yourself, why is this here? What is it trying to show me? What is it trying to accomplish? I mean, you should be doing this with all of our techniques, but with repetition, you should really be thinking, okay, what information is being repeated? Why is it being emphasized? What am I supposed to understand about that? Okay, guys. Have a beautiful day out there. Don't be afraid to reach out with any questions or comments. Okay? Have a lovely one. I look forward to our future conversations.